Hi, I'm Erica, and I hope your week is off to a fantastic start. I'm thrilled that you're here, and if you're new to the Tea Minds, then welcome. This is a lovely, warm, cosy space where we pause for tea so that we can reconnect with ourselves, rebalance our mind, body, and spirit, and learn how to savour those precious moments before they slip away. In each episode, we explore how something as simple as a cup of tea can be a gateway to mindfulness, mental fitness, and learning to be more present in the way that we live. With inspiring tea routines, thought-provoking insights, and heartfelt conversations with amazing guests, this is your time to pause, rebalance, and thrive. Life is fast, but your tea doesn't have to be. So pop the kettle on, grab your favourite mug, and let's dive into the art of living with a tea mind. Hey, welcome, welcome. So I've got with me today is Celia Aceae, and she is, where do I start? So originally she studied conservation and horticulture, and then used your plant-based education to enter a career in tea. From salesperson to research and development specialist, you then spent a decade learning the ins and outs of the tea industry, inspired by botanical research while also creating lots of different tea blends. And then you returned to university to get your MSc in biodiversity and taxonomy of plants. So we'll delve into that in more detail. And though you currently work in conifer conservation, your heart still belongs to Camellia sinensis, which those of you tea lovers out there will know Camellia sinensis is what tea comes from. So it is a rather magical plant. So you'll always find her with a mug of tea in hand, and occasionally find her offering consultations and tea courses in her spare time. So welcome to the Tea in Mind podcast. And I'm going to brew you some tea. So for those of you listening along, we are brewing some Rose Petal Purify, which is a really simple blend of white tea with some rose petals and a little bit of ginger. So really good just to settle us this time of year. Excellent. So yes, I will brew that and we can have a little conversation as we drink some tea. So yes, where would you like to start? Tell me a little bit more about your background and your story.
Okay. So kind of as you covered, I originally studied conservation enforcement, which is kind of like the laws that govern conservation. And from there, I went on to become a park ranger in Alberta, in Canada, which I didn't love as much as I thought I would, but I learned that I loved the plant part. So I learned everything about the plants that were in my parks, and that really interested me, and it kind of spurred me on to go study horticulture. And so I went to a 3-year horticulture program in Niagara Falls, and throughout that time, I was really focused on growing edible plants, the herb garden, understanding functional plants and how we ingest them, and also understanding how to design with those. So I was really interested in designing edible gardens. And then I went and did an internship in Japan, and I lived in Japan for 3 months studying tea growing and microgreen growing, which was very exciting. And then when I finished, I um, wrote a letter to my favorite tea company in Canada, which was the largest loose leaf tea company at the time. And I just said, like, hey, I think I'd be really good at blending your teas for these reasons. And interestingly, it was a letter I'd written a year prior. And in that letter, I'd said, like, I went to Japan and I studied tea, which I hadn't done yet. And when I took out this letter a year later, I said, like, I've done all these things. And I just changed the person that I addressed the letter to and sent it off. And I kind of thought maybe, it's in my 5-year plan that maybe I'll get hired for this company, by this company to do their blending. And in the meantime, I'm just going to move to Montreal because that's where the company was based. And so I moved to Montreal. I didn't have the job yet, but I just thought I'll be there if they ever are interested. And I started studying tea a lot more intensely. There's a really great company in Montreal as well called Camellia sinensis, which is the scientific name of tea, as you said. And they teach a lot of tea courses. So I started studying with them and studying on my own a little bit more. And actually, by the end of August of that year, I was hired doing tea blending. So research and development in tea.
or Camellia sinensis?
For not for them, for David's Tea. So
Okay.
that's the tea company in Canada that at the time they had about 230 stores across North America. And yeah, I started working. I had already been working for them a little bit behind the counter, and doing a lot of sales of tea throughout my studies. And so when I'd moved to Montreal, I'd kept like a part-time job doing that, and I was also doing edible landscape design for people, which was really fun, and installing edible gardens for people. And yeah, I started doing blending full time, which was amazing, and it really got me to expand my knowledge about plants and herbs. And during that time, I did all of the World Tea Academy tea sommelier training, so that was very exciting. And I think probably one of my favorite parts of that job was understanding how plants are combined, how they react with each other, and going to herbal conferences and meeting herbalists who were doing the same thing in kind of a different capacity. And so my area of expertise in blending was really focused on blending with benefits, even though working for a company like that, you can't advertise that these blends have benefits, but always keeping that in mind and using all of my botanical knowledge to date to make the most functional blends that I could. And I started noticing patterns in the plants that I was blending with, and noticing that lots of plants came from the same families that I was blending with, like cacao and linden and hibiscus are all from Malvaceae. So they're all from the same family, and that's the same family as like cotton and okra. And I just kept thinking, there are all these patterns, and I was working a lot with different blenders around the world, and we worked a lot using scientific names. And I thought, I really want to know more about these connections. And so, yeah, after a time, I left and I moved to Edinburgh, where I studied the taxonomy of plants, and I did my master's in that. So that's understanding classification of plants. And so a lot of people who work in taxonomy are like describing new species or understanding how plants are connected and related to each other, or maybe how they're not as related to each other as we thought. And we're kind of in this era of using like very physical characteristics of plants, but also using genetics to understand that. And so we have this whole new world of understanding in front of us, and it's a very exciting time to work in taxonomy, I think. And so then I decided I wanted to stay here and kind of be a part of that community. And so I'm currently working in conifer conservation, where I'm managing about 300 sites that are growing conifers, rare and threatened conifers around the UK and Ireland. And I guess I'm like I said, I'm still in love with tea. I don't think it could ever leave my life. I think once it's spoken to, it never leaves. And so I just incorporate tea into my life as much as possible. And sometimes I get to teach a course here and there or do tastings for people. Yeah.
Oh
That's
gosh,
the whole thing.
I've got so many questions after that.
Okay.
It's just so interesting. I guess I'm really curious to know where does that interest in plants and trees and the health benefits of them, and just where does that whole interest and curiosity come from?
That's a really good question. So I had a bit of an alternative upbringing, even though I grew up in Alberta. My parents didn't particularly believe in Western medicine at the same level as maybe other people. And so I learned very early the benefits of plants. If one of my sisters had suffered from quite bad headaches, so I knew that, if I would go on my bike and harvest willow bark down the street and make her a tea to help alleviate her headaches. And I don't know if it was ever the willow bark or just, it's pretty bitter stuff. Just sometimes she'd be like, "It's okay, Cece, I don't have a headache anymore, I promise." But I was really interested in it. And yeah, my mom says probably the earliest books I ever asked her for were books about plants and their benefits and how they functioned within people. So how to identify them. And she said, I was constantly trying to identify plants before you so that I could assure myself that what you were picking and giving to everybody was okay or not. But she knows a lot about plants as well. So a lot of what I learned was at her side. And in other courses, I did a lot of junior forest wardens as a child, and we learned a lot about functional plants there as well. But that was mostly under the understanding of like if you're outside and if you're trapped in the wilderness or something, if you are lost, what can you eat and what is functional? And so um, a lot of it was, I guess, survival, and then it just became an interest.
Yeah, I find that absolutely fascinating. I did a went on a foraging course
Oh
a
yeah.
few months ago, and it was just fascinating. And we must have stayed within, I don't know, like it wasn't a very big area, but we were there for like 4 hours, and there was so much within that little area, just different little patches. It was super interesting. But yeah, I would love to sort of be able to retain that knowledge and know a little bit more so that I can, when I'm out and about, and can forage for things that I know are safe. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's key is like when you're brought up with it, you kind of have that familiarity. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of adults that I speak to who are getting into it are like, but how do I trust whether it's safe or not? And I think I was in in one of my taxonomy courses, and a teacher handed us a plant. I'd never seen it before in my life. And she said, "What family is this in?" We're just looking at the characteristics. And I kind of had a few guesses. And then I brought it up to my face to smell it. And immediately my whole body was like, don't put this near your face.
Mm.
And I think that was such an interesting experience to recognize that I'd never seen this plant before. I didn't know what family it was in. But as soon as I brought it close, and then my mind was like, oh, it's Solanaceae because I shouldn't be eating this. And we do eat a lot of Solanaceae like tomatoes and potatoes, but it is also the nightshade family. So
Right.
it's a family to exercise caution with. And I think we do have those instincts within us, which is very
Mm.
interesting. But I think it's just about like honing that and paying attention to what you see. And when I go on walks, I'm always cataloging like, okay, there's some plantain there. If I get stung by a wasp, it's there. If if I see some dandelion root, I'm thinking about like, okay, that would be great to harvest for the root. Maybe not if it's growing on the street or something, but
Mhm.
um yeah, I'm just kind of like always thinking if I need something, where is it? And if I get really sick, probably when I moved to Montreal was the first time that I had a really bad flu, and I thought like, oh, I just need to go outside and harvest maybe some spruce buds and then, but I was in the city and I didn't know where any of these plants were. And it was the first time where I felt really helpless. And my
Mm.
friend said, just go to the pharmacy and get some vitamins. And I thought, but the pharmacy closes at 11, so it's closed. I can't go now. But the forest is always open, and the forest has so many gifts. And
Mm.
so even here when I'm ill, I'll like walk around the meadows and sometimes harvest things that I see that are very helpful and maybe not something I would recommend for everybody, but I mean, the gifts of the world are everywhere, and the plants that we need are always there. And I think like if we know where to look for them or we know how to find them, it's
Mm.
amazing the abundance that's around us.
Yeah, I think there's something there as well. A lot of lessons there in having the trust in ourselves that we actually know if we just quieten down enough to listen
Mm,
to ourselves. And if you look at animals, like particularly dogs when they're out and about, they know what they can eat and what not necessarily. I'm looking after
yeah.
my mum's black Labrador at the moment, but when it comes to plants, at least they
Yeah.
know naturally what they can and can't touch. And I
Yeah.
think we sometimes need to just tune in and listen, trust ourselves a little bit more as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And definitely if you have a friend, you can send photos to your friend if you know someone who knows. Like I wouldn't encourage anybody to just start putting things in their mouths if they don't know what it is, but to
Yeah.
really just focus and learn. And I think plants are so different that when you start looking at them very closely, you start to notice those differences, the way you can tell like two people apart is sometimes I say to people I have a hard time recognizing different people, but I can always identify like 4 species of grass in your lawn. I can't maybe identify 4 people side by side, but um like it's just what I look at the most as plants. And I think if we just pay attention more when we're out for walks, that those differences will start to make an appearance to us.
Yeah, no, I
Mm.
think, yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. So do you keep a store of all these different plants and herbs in your house?
I do, yeah. And it's funny because when I worked for David's Tea, I had this huge tub. I guess I had 4 tubs in our office that were teas that we blends that we'd kind of said no to, but that they had quite strong benefits associated with them. And
Mm.
I had like an immunity bin and a like pain pain relief bin for like cramps and headaches and things, and a sleep bin, and the things that people would come to me a lot for. What did people visit me and ask me for? And they would always say like, I need something from Celia's first aid kit. And I have the same thing at home. Like I just have 4 boxes of herbs really. And so when people are having a hard time sleeping, or I think that's probably the most common one actually that I get asked about is sleep and then immunity. Um, and people ask me about it, then I can blend them something very personal. And I think that's the difference between working for a company that's blending for a whole continent, and you don't really get that personal interaction with people, and blending for a specific person.
Yeah.
Because you can kind of understand what they need more specifically.
Yeah. That's it's really interesting. And how do you find the tea plant itself interacts in that space and with different plants you come
Yeah.
across?
Well, I guess like the first thing that people think about when they think about tea and function is often caffeine and energy. And I think that's very specific to the Western world. When I lived in Japan, at one point I asked someone about caffeine and tea, and he just looked at me and he said, "You North Americans, you're always asking about caffeine. No one here cares about that."
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting that that's the thing that we think about first. So when I'm thinking about blending, I'm thinking like, is someone going to be consuming this at night or in the morning? Should it be caffeinated or not? And that is something that I consider, but it's also something that I consider for, what maybe for more like brain function and the L-theanine perspective of things. So, is it something that they're consuming during their workday? I might put a little bit of tea in because I want the L-theanine for the focus and the concentration. And
For people that aren't familiar with L-theanine, can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure, yeah.
Fascinating property.
So L-theanine is an amino acid in tea. And it is found in a few other things like mushrooms, but primarily in tea, and it generally is said to increase focus and concentration. And you find it quite prevalently in shaded green teas. So as when you shade teas, often the L-theanine content goes up. And so teas like matcha or gyokuro, things like that, are pretty high in L-theanine. Interestingly, I think a lot of like GABA teas also have high L-theanine. And so it's something, I guess, if you think of like monks that are consuming tea, that was one of the reasons they were consuming it, was because it was so high in L-theanine that it was increasing focus and concentration when they were doing meditation. And so it was one of the reasons that tea became so dominant in that lifestyle.
Yeah, it's kind of how it all started, apparently, wasn't it?
Yeah.
A tea leaf fell into a monk's water while he was meditating.
Yeah.
And he found he could do it a lot more.
One of the stories. Yeah, one of the origin stories of tea.
Yes, who knows if it's true or not.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just such an interesting span so far, from park ranger and now looking after conifers, and you've got lots of people all over. Is it Scotland or the UK wide?
All of the UK, Ireland, and we do have a few sites in Europe, but I think after Brexit, things got a bit more complicated to transfer plant material, so less in
Not
Europe.
just plants.
Yeah,
everything got more complicated.
Yeah. So it's kind of a variety of sites. So lots of schools or private homeowners, estate owners, gardens, lots of like botanic gardens or private gardens, hotels. So it's quite a mix, like municipalities who have decided that they would like to participate in growing rare and threatened conifers on their own sites, which is very exciting that people are so interested. I couldn't believe when I started that, there are over 300 sites all around, that people are so keen to grow conifers. I think conifers are a bit underrated in a lot of ways. Like people see angiosperms like flowering plants, and they're quite interesting and unique. And I love conifers because they're a little bit underrated. And because they're so unique, but you have to look for the small details. in them.
So what is so special about conifers? Why should we be
Well,
interested in?
okay. Yeah, I guess so. Conifers evolved quite early on, so they evolved before flowering plants. So they're kind of some of the oldest plants around. They're one of the most threatened plant groups. So there are about 600 conifers and in the world, and about 30% of those are threatened.
600.
Yeah, 600 species.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, and about 30% of those are threatened. So there's quite a high threat rate, and I think mainly because of forestry, wildfires, just climate change as it changes their habitats, but just habitat destruction in general. So
Mm.
um, yeah, I think they need our care quite a lot, and it's interesting that we can grow. I guess when you think of conifers, you think of maybe like your Christmas tree. My slogan of the year is conifers aren't just for Christmas. So maybe you think of a fir or a spruce or a pine because we're from a bit more of a Nordic region, but maybe you think of monkey puzzle trees like Ericaria. I don't know if you can
Oh,
picture a monkey
I
puzzle
love
tree.
monkey puzzle
Okay, yeah,
trees.
great.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a conifer.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah. And then yeah, there are lots of warm climate conifers as well. And I think it's very interesting that we're growing those in the UK. So, for example, I just brought about 500 plants down to Cornwall to about 24 different gardens in Cornwall who have volunteered to become new sites. And a lot of those are warmer climate conifers. So we're kind of testing if they can grow there or not. And maybe we can expand the program that way, or we can expand the program by teaching other people how to do the same thing. So the program has been going on for about 30 years. And so we have a lot of data about growing ex situ collections. So collections that are not from their native ranges um, in the UK currently, but that can be expanded. And I guess so a lot of our collections come from Chile, for example. And recently there was a big flood in Chile. And so they lost a lot of their conifers there. And now we have that material, so we can provide it back to them because of that destruction.
Mhm.
So they haven't lost their trees because they've been growing somewhere else, which is kind of nice.
And I
Yeah.
imagine these trees are very good for us, for our environment and
Yeah.
the health of the planet.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, I mean, any tree is good. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. But I think in coming from a Canadian background where we have um, a lot of native plants that we're protecting, and moving to the UK where so much of the landscape that we see is not native plants or it's a very manipulated landscape, and it's been um, very maintained. I guess it's been maintained in a very particular way for
Mhm.
many, many years. And so there's a conversation about should we go back to growing native plants and what does that look like? Should we be limited to that? Or, there are so many other plants here anyway. Should we expand on that instead? And I think more and more we're moving away from planting monocultures, single crops of trees, because when you have a single plantation of trees, then maybe it's less resistant to pests and diseases, um, to any big environmental disaster or event. Um, and so the more diversity that we can encourage, the better. And I think if you have a manicured landscape anyway, like a garden or an estate,
Mhm.
then why not grow something that is quite rare and threatened instead of what everybody else is growing?
Yeah. Goodness,
Yeah,
fascinating subject.
yeah, it is.
I'm just curious to know how that relates to the tea world. So, say when
Mm,
you're thinking about huge tea gardens in China, and a lot of them are or Japan or wherever, very manicured. There are rows and rows of tea plants all at the same height, very well maintained and cultivated. What's the future for tea in that sort of sphere?
that's a really good question. Actually, I've been seeing and hearing a lot more people questioning how else can we grow tea?
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I guess, because I'm a bit more in the research science sector right now, I get to see those questions come up and be parts of those conversations, which is exciting. So yeah, there is a big conversation around, how can we grow tea in maybe a more sustainable manner? But tea as a whole, you know, it's a long-lived plant. And so it can be sustainable. And it's also an understory plant. So it does require, dappled shade when it's growing. So you can grow other things with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, um, there are lots of old tea trees in China, for example, where the single tree is very carefully maintained and protected. And that means that the environment around it is also maintained and protected because that's how you're maintaining the health of your tree. And so I think if we move to, yeah, I mean, I don't have all the answers because this is a conversation that's ongoing, but I think um, there's a particular garden that I'm thinking of in Hawaii that has been really um, trialing lots of different methods of growing tea in a more sustainable manner. And I think lots of countries are getting into tea growing as a new industry, especially as we see climate change. I mean, we have tea growers in Scotland. I met with about 50 tea growers in France in the fall, and we're kind of expanding. But these growers are asking themselves, how can I do this more sustainably? And um, what does that look like? Does that look like breeding resistant plants and then interplanting with other things? Does it look like maintaining trees instead of like a plucking table? Does it look like, how do we reduce our pesticide use on tea? Because in some countries it is a really, it's a crop that does receive quite a lot of like herbicides around it because of some of the most invasive species can really threaten tea plantations in some countries. So yeah, I guess this conversation is ongoing and it depends where you're located
Yeah.
and what the struggles, the biggest struggles are that you're concerned with.
Yeah, it is a huge conversation, and yeah, you could
Yeah,
you could talk about that alone for hours. I
definitely.
think some people are quite surprised to know that there is quite a lot of tea grown in Scotland already,
Yeah.
and in the UK, but with some really good success. Even though we have like really cold climates and like frosty winters, tea is, as you said, it's such a hardy plant
Yeah.
that it can withstand those temperatures. And we work with a tea garden in Perthshire, and she like covers up her plants and like almost puts them to sleep in the winter, makes sure they've got little cozy jackets, and just experimenting with lots of different ways
Yeah.
to maintain the plants and to keep them thriving so that they are looked after throughout the winter so they can thrive come the springtime when they start to flower.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's so exciting. I mean, there's so much room for innovation when you get to start from scratch in a way,
Mm-hmm.
which is what, any new tea growers is doing, and especially in these new terroirs, like, yeah, like Scotland. There's so much room to learn and to try new practices and to learn from lots of other people and countries who are doing it and to develop your own methods as well. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
That's what I really love about the tea world as well, is it's such a small community that people are so open to connecting with you and teaching and sharing what they've learned so you can sort of start your own practice,
Yeah.
which is just, it's so lovely. I think it's quite a unique industry in that respect. And I just remember when I was starting out over 16 years ago, I first um, put on my backpack and went by myself to Sri Lanka and India. But I went to Sri Lanka first of all and didn't know anybody. It was 2007 or something. So
Wow.
there was still quite a lot going on in Sri Lanka at that time.
Hmm.
But just the welcome that I got, and people were so receptive to having someone listen and be able to teach what they've learned and show us their tea garden and their practices. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's
just
so nice.
fascinating. And I just love that power of tea to sort of bring people together as well, even if you don't speak the same language. Like there's been times particularly one in Taiwan springs to mind, just with I was away up in the hills in Taiwan and loads of villagers, like we'd been making oolong tea, so we're having to get up in the night and check the moisture content and so on and keeping turning it. But then we had tea and like the whole group of villagers and tea farmers, and we'd sat there for hours,
Wow.
not being able to converse verbally properly, but you could understand each other and know what was going on. And yeah, it's just such a brilliant experience that tea can sort of bring that to people.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Hmm.
I agree. It's such a nice industry to be in. Like, I don't think I've ever been in an industry that shares more, that's more open. Um, and I think it's because, the more people that are drinking tea, the more we're all succeeding because we
Yeah.
all just love tea. We just want everybody to love it as much as we do.
Exactly.
And I think even in thinking of like my time in Montreal and, you know, even though I guess some people might say, oh, all these tea companies are competitors. I don't think we ever saw each other as competitors. And, as soon as the lights went off, we would all hang out and drink tea together. And
Yeah.
didn't matter where you were from or what company you worked for. The only thing that mattered was that you loved tea. And I think that's such a wonderful spirit to be a part of.
Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. And what is it about tea that is so magical for you?
Whoa. What is it that's so magical? Okay. On like, yeah, maybe on the magical level, I guess it is the sense of bringing people together. I love sharing unique flavors and um, the experience of drinking tea, introducing people to different teas and um, sharing that with people coming together to drink tea. But I also love seeing other people through their tea experiences. Like, I love to go to someone's house, and when I go to someone's house, they're like, I would like to make you a tea, but I'm so nervous. I'm too scared. You can make your own tea. And I always say, like, no, I really want you to make tea the way you like it, because then I get to experience the world through their eyes, the tea through their eyes. So I love that part of it. I also have this this theory, that's just like maybe a personal thought. I think that as humans, we crave things that are whole and complete flavors. So things that have, you know, sweet and sour and umami and like all the tastes, but also these like several levels of aroma and flavor together. And so I think, maybe that's the reason why we really love chocolate, or um, maybe that we really love wine, because you can find all of those things in it. And I think tea is that you can find every taste and so many flavors, and it's one plant. It's just Camellia sinensis, and it's doing everything.
Yeah. I mean,
Like
it blows my mind every time.
it's incredible. And I think like every time I go to the World Tea and Health Symposium, they're just like, there are sessions on tea and immunity and tea and heart health and tea and mental health and, you know, everything. It's like days of talking about how beneficial tea is. And interestingly, they always compare it to one other plant that kind of comes close, and that's cacao.
Ah.
And I think that's really interesting to think about. So the first time I learned that, I made a goal to myself to always eat a piece of chocolate every day for my health.
Oh, I'm going to start doing that.
Yeah.
Probably do that already, to be honest.
But I think it's just such an incredible plant that it does so much.
Hmm.
And then when you get into blends, you can really target different things for different people, and that can be a really personal experience. And it's just so incredible. I think we like the power of plants is so underrated. And I always say to people, you drink coffee and you feel energized, or you drink wine and you get drunk. Like, that's just a plant, you
Mhm.
know? That's not, it's a plant and it's gone through kind of a change. And tea is also a plant that's gone through a change. But anytime someone says to me, like, oh, it's just a herb or it's just a plant, it's not really going to do anything. I kind of challenge them, and I think, like, there are so many plants that do amazing things.
Yeah, definitely. And I would put tea right up there at the top of the list. And
Exactly.
I think just talking about some of the compounds that we were talking about earlier, like the
Hmm.
L-theanine and polyphenols and things, just
Hmm.
the fact that tea has that ability to relax you but keep you alert at the same time is really what makes it unique. And I
Yeah.
think it's really interesting what you're saying about the full and complete flavour profile and aromas that you get from tea.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I've been trying, like, I have a cup of tea every morning, but I've been trying to have a herbal tea first thing in the morning.
Oh, okay.
I've read about something called adenosine, which I'm not an expert on, so yeah, something I
Okay.
want to do a little bit more research on, but apparently on waking, sort of having caffeine 13 minutes after you wake can be better for your adenosine levels. Anyway, I'll have to
Rather
now,
than like right away.
rather than right away, which I find
Interesting.
really difficult.
Well, I have a confession. In the mornings, often I have my, like, I usually drink herbal tea before I go to bed, and I
Mhm.
almost never finish it. And I always drink it in like a 16-ounce mug, so it's quite large. And usually the first thing I drink in the morning is the rest of my herbal tea. So I'm
Oh,
on
there
it.
you go. You're already doing it
Yeah,
properly. But
that's
yeah,
funny.
it's just having that first cup of proper tea.
Yeah.
Nothing else really hits the spot. It just has a real effect on you, I
Yeah.
think. Much more so that I couldn't drink a cup of coffee first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
It would be too, personally for me, it would be much too brutal and too rude and awakening. I like the
Yeah.
gentleness of tea that really lets me come awake slowly.
Yeah. I think it depends on the tea for me. And I think when you start drinking a lot of tea and even just Camellia sinensis, you're just drinking tea. Um, every single tea has such a different effect. And I think maybe I pay attention to the effects of plants in my body very carefully anyway. But like if I have an orange pekoe in the morning, which I do most mornings, I love orange pekoe. Um, and if I have maybe one specific orange pekoe every morning, I get this sense of euphoria, like absolute euphoria about 30 minutes after drinking it. I'm just like maybe
Mm.
15 to 30 minutes. I'm like, wow, the day is going to be so amazing. And I love everybody, you
Yeah.
know? And it's so interesting if I drink, I also love Chinese green teas. If I drink like a Chinese green tea, I maybe don't feel that as much,
Mhm.
but I do feel a bit more. Hmm. Sometimes I feel a bit more steady with the current teas that I'm drinking, the current green ones that I'm drinking. Whereas like
Yeah.
a Gyokuro is like my party tea. Like if I don't drink alcohol, so if I go to a party and other people are drinking alcohol, I'll always bring a Gyokuro because I'm like hyped. And,
Nice.
and maybe it's the
Like
alchemy.
you're
I'm
at
like,
night time, wow.
yeah, wild. Well, everybody else is drinking alcohol. You know, gotta have something to
Yeah, do you have it hot or cold?
hot. Yeah.
Ah, because yeah, I've stopped drinking alcohol as well. It's almost a year now. Just decided one day that yeah, I wanted to stop. I did a cost benefit analysis in my head and thought, "Do you know what, it's
Mm.
not worth it. I can don't need alcohol." So I've been playing around with teas and tea spritzers a lot more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a real role there for tea because it does have that effect on you and it can sort of keep you relaxed or it can energize you and really boost you. But yeah, I've
Hmm.
not tried, I've not been brave enough to do Gaiguru at night time.
Yeah, um I guess it depends what you want out of the night, you know. But
Mm,
sometimes I find that because yeah, if I go to like an event and everybody's drinking alcohol and I'm really not at that level, I'm not maybe yeah, I'm not feeling the same way as everybody else. Maybe I need something to kind of like stay awake because I like to go to bed around 10, you know, usually. So I might
yeah.
need something to put me over and kind of hype me up a bit. But yeah, I mean, I might not sleep very well after, but
At least you won't have a hangover the next day.
exactly.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you say about listening to your body and how particular tea makes you feel.
Hmm.
And that's something we're really trying to encourage people to do as part of the Tea Mind system.
Hmm.
So the Tea Mind is all based on the Chinese five elements. So it's really just tuning yourself to nature, like what you've been talking about through plants and trees and so on. and tuning into your body as well, into the seasons, into how you are feeling and what your intuition or your body or your mind is telling you. So just taking that little pause to really slow down and see how a particular tea makes you feel, and then trying a different one and sort of, yeah, working with the different elements and different teas in that way.
Yeah. And I think it does take a long time because, you have to kind of start to notice a pattern. And if you're like, as someone who's been drinking tea my whole life, I just, I notice a significant difference, and maybe I'll drink an orange pekoe like every single day at the same time. And then, if I change it up for a week, I notice a significant difference. But it's really about maybe like over a prolonged period of time becoming familiar with different tea types
Yeah.
and how they affect you. But it can be really hard at the beginning. I think maybe 10 years ago, if someone had asked me, I wouldn't have had any idea.
Yeah. But even just having, like, maybe you're having an Earl Grey or a green tea and just sitting and seeing, is it making your energy, do you feel like your energy settling, or is it more of a rising energy? Just sort of noticing any
Yeah.
changes, or do you feel it in a particular part of your body, and just really sort of slowing down and paying attention in that
Yeah.
way. I'm curious as well about your morning routine. Like, so you start with finishing off your cold herbal
Yeah.
infusion.
And that's something I usually confess. No waste. Yeah, usually I'm just like thirsty in the morning, so I'll just drink the rest of my herbal tea. But then yeah, usually I make an orange pekoe in the morning. And that's maybe for nostalgia's sake. So when I was working for David's Tea, I went to Sri Lanka and did sourcing in Sri Lanka. So I think I have quite a soft spot. But unfortunately, I've been running out of my orange pekoe. So I'm on a mission to find a replacement. So I've been trialing lots of different things. And I think often I do drink like a Chinese black tea of some kind instead, because I really love those like chocolatey notes. I think if it's spring, especially in the lilac season, I love a Taiwanese oolong. That's like my all-time favorite in the spring, but I don't really drink it any other time of the year. And then yeah, usually I have like a green tea, usually a Chinese green tea after, because I do find like I get quite wired from Japanese green teas. So if I'm having a work day, even though it's high in L-theanine, I'm also like maybe I'll get too intense. So I actually don't go for them that often, even though Gyokuro is probably my favorite tea of all time. I don't have it that often. And then usually recently I've been trying to reduce my caffeine intake. So I've been drinking more herbal teas in the afternoon, and I love rooibos. I think not everybody does, but I do love rooibos. I love honeybush, and I love blending herbs. So I guess it's a perfect opportunity. And I do a lot of rose-based things because I love rose and I love floral notes. And maybe that's not everybody's cup of tea, but I guess it's about finding what you love and drinking that. But yeah, I don't drink water unless it has like tea in it, which is kind of like
I always feel guilty for that, but actually, tea is so hydrating. You're probably getting more water than if you were just drinking glasses of straight tap water.
Yeah, and I think if you like what you're drinking more, right?
Yeah.
And when you're training to be a tea sommelier, there's like a whole unit of just tasting the different types of water. And so you're just tasting water for a month. And that's such an intense experience as someone who like is already tasting lots of things all the time. And I already didn't love the taste of water, but then identifying like what is it that that I'm tasting in water. And so now I think about water as almost like, when you're tasting a tea, you're tasting water.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not exactly what I meant to say, but I guess like I think of the flavor of water quite consciously, and it's not a flavor that I particularly enjoy. And I think a lot of people will say like, water doesn't have a flavor, but to me it really does. And so yeah, I love to have something in my water that I enjoy with it.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing how the different water that you're brewing your tea with has such an effect on your tea,
Oh yeah.
which isn't surprising because it is mostly water. So living in Scotland, what kind of water do you use? Tap water or do you filter it or?
Yeah, here I mainly because I've moved a lot since coming here and I haven't settled down enough to have like a Brita filter. Or like a filter of any kind. I do use tap water. But when I was living in Canada, I almost always used a filtered water. My mom lives on like 20 acres, so she has her own well. And so the water that we drink is well water at her home. So it really affects tea so differently. And there are teas that I only drink at her place because it tastes so good with her water.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievably good. And then any other time I don't get the same flavor extraction from the tea. So yeah, I have like teas for this location, teas when I'm camping because I love like when you're camping and you like pump your own water and it's also from a well but in your campground or something. I love that. And I guess I'm really lucky that I come from Canada and we have lots of water like anywhere you go. If you're not in a municipality, you're often drinking well water from a specific location. So you get the opportunity to taste lots of different locations of water. And yeah, sometimes even like glacier water, because I'm from Alberta originally. Like when I was a kid, I loved when we would go to the glaciers drinking. I don't know if you're supposed to do that, but we did. You're getting all my confessions here. But that can really change things as well, like when you're on a hike and if you get to make tea from that water.
Gosh,
amazing.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
You're making me really want to go to Canada.
It's worth it for the water. No, it's worth it for the tea. And everything else.
Yeah, just tea really does come to life when it's in sort of natural spring water, like straight from the land or whatever. I've had that experience a few times and yeah, you can't really beat it. But it does ruin a tea after that if you've not got access to the same water.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you're sourcing too, because sometimes you taste the tea in the country of origin and you love it, and then you bring it back to wherever you're making the tea, and it's just not the same.
Yeah.
And I've even had that experience, traveling and like going to the Netherlands and having a tea there and thinking, I love this tea so much, and bringing it home and making it with the water here and thinking, it's really not offering what I remembered it offering before. So yeah, it can change things drastically.
And yeah, just must explain, we're sitting on the floor in a lovely tea space in Edinburgh in Scotland. So
it's such a nice tea space. I love your space here.
It is nice, but you have to be getting used to sort of sitting on the floor can take some getting used to.
I like it. I like the experience.
But yeah, they do say that the best water is the one closest to where the tea's actually grown. Is what's going to give that particular tea its best flavour and to get the most out of it. Which sadly isn't always possible.
No, almost for us, very rarely.
Indeed. But yeah, if you ever get the chance, I think that's something that would definitely encourage people to try and do.
Yeah.
So you drink lots of tea in the morning. Are there any other things you do for your sort of mental well-being or fitness?
I do love Qigong. I don't know if you know.
Me too.
Okay,
I love
cool.
Qigong, yeah.
Yeah, so I for a long time I was doing Qigong every morning. And I've actually moved it to my evenings now a bit more just because of when I have time. So Qigong is a big part of my life, and I walk almost everywhere. So I walk 45 minutes to work, 45 minutes home. So that's an hour and a half walking every day, which I think really helps. I think I'm someone with a lot of energy. Maybe I'm just caffeinated all the time. But if I don't expend that energy, I can't sleep at night. So I tend to try and get as much activity in throughout the day. I read a lot, and I think that's probably a big key to my mental health. Not always anything serious, just something that I enjoy.
So yeah, Qigong, do you want maybe just explain for people that aren't familiar with
it? I don't often have to explain it, but I would say Qigong is like, to me, how I perceive it is it's like a martial art. So I grew up doing karate and judo throughout most of my life. So I did lots of martial arts beforehand, and I've often found that like something like yoga is a bit slow for me. And it doesn't, I've never, yeah, I've never been really engaged with yoga. And I think that's just maybe my personality type. And so I found Qigong. Originally, my acupuncturist suggested Qigong for some back pain that I was having. So I started following someone on YouTube and just doing what she was recommending. And yeah, then it just kind of became a part of my day to day. And so I consider it like faster than Tai Chi, slower than karate. And so Chi is like your energy. And so it's kind of like moving your energy throughout your body. And I don't think I'm doing a very good job of explaining this, so I don't know if you want to explain better.
Yeah, no, it is something that's quite hard to explain, I think. And I love Qigong, and I'm just sort of trying to get into it a lot more now and make a practice out of it because it ties into the five elements, which
Mhm.
is what I'm just fascinated with for the tea mind and how to use that in our everyday life. So there's five element qigong, which is amazing, but every move, because it all relates to different parts of your body, it's really related to your different acupressure points as well.
Mm.
And it's just fascinating. And it goes, I think it goes hand in hand with tea and with that slowing down and with that using the energy, because there's lots of energy that comes from tea as well. But
Yeah.
for me, it's a really good way to get that brain, that sort of mind body connection,
Mhm.
which for a lot of people, I think, is can be missing or can be quite hard to keep that connection when we're so busy with our everyday life.
Mm.
So I really do find it very helpful to sort of bring myself back into my body and sort of be more aware of what's going on and excuse me, how I'm feeling and so on. So in the Chinese five elements, I'm predominantly a water element. So
Mm.
basically made up of 99% water, probably mostly tea. But that
Yeah.
means the stress response to that is sort of fear, detachment, that sort of thing. So
Mm.
I really find Qigong really useful to sort of bring myself back into my body and sort of engage again so that I can move forward and sort of get on with my day and overcome limiting beliefs or whatever. There's such a huge tool when it's used alongside something like tea. I think it's
Yeah,
fascinating, very useful.
that's true. Yeah, I think I mean it's a lot of animal forms that I do, the
Mhm.
type that I do. And I like it because it's flowing. There's like a constant movement,
Yes,
which
you don't get bored.
yeah, probably yeah, I don't know as much about the five elements as you do, but probably I would say I'm very fire. Like
Mhm.
that's really in every side of things, I think yeah, I'm predominantly fire in
Mhm.
everything. So I do like a lot of movement. And um yeah, I think like being a child and having done karate my whole life, there's this sense of like when you step onto the tatami, the mat and into the dojo, you leave everything behind.
Mhm.
And I think at the beginning, when you're a kid and you're doing that, you're like, I don't get this, you know. At first, it's very difficult. And then it kind of becomes second nature to just leave everything, to really clear your mind and leave everything
Mhm.
away. And it becomes like a safe place or like a calming place to be. And so when I was younger, I found like doing a kata is like the most wonderful thing that I could feel was like, and I guess a kata is like a prearranged form of offenses and defenses, where you're I guess, fighting against an imaginary enemy, but it's really like almost a dance
Mhm.
in what you're doing. And I just found it to be so, I don't want to say meditative, but it does really take you out of your that really intense headspace that sometimes you can be in when you're
Yeah.
thinking about your day-to-day life. And it does bring you right back into your body and you're really intensely in the moment in exactly what you're doing. And I think Qigong gives me the same sense of peace in the same way.
Yeah.
And I do think making tea also gives me that sense of peace. Like when I'm making my tea, I am always very conscious about what I'm doing. And I think if I have a long morning and I'm doing um, a long morning, as in like, you wake up and you enjoy yourself and you get to do something nice. I always use my gaiwan, and I'm very conscious about the tea that I'm putting in and the process of steeping my tea. And but even when I'm making a tea on the go, I do really, it's like I'm here in this moment making my tea, and it's a very intentional thing. And it feels a lot like that same experience of like leaving everything, letting everything go for the moment and being here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of good lessons there for us all. I could talk to you literally for hours. I've still got so many questions. I think we'll have to get you back on the podcast. I wanted to ask whether do you brew tea outside often?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe not as much since moving to Scotland, because maybe the weather isn't always conducive to it. But if I'm camping, I always brew tea outside, and it's such a nice experience. It's like instead of having a tea boat, you can just be outside and have that experience. If I'm going on a picnic or anything, I always make tea. And I guess like transporting the hot water can be a challenge sometimes, or if you have like a little flame for on the go, like a little, what I kind of want blanking on the word, like a
little burner or something.
Yeah, something like that, like a little kerosene lamp. So you can make tea on the go, then maybe that's the best way. But yeah, I think in Canada I always made tea outside, and just I think it's quite hot in the summer, so it's nice to spend time outside. And now maybe I'll make my tea inside and then take it outside to enjoy. But yeah, anytime I'm going on a walk, I have a cup of tea.
Me too. Yeah, I think you get, I don't know, just because of the whole experience being outside, you're in nature, and you can really get that sense of just letting everything else go and just being in that moment. So
yeah,
I always carry my little travel tea set with me.
Yeah,
everywhere.
I'm a bit rogue. I'm very particular about what I drink out of, and I only like ceramic and glass. I hate like plastic, metal, anything like that. I just don't really like the texture or feel. And I think it really changes the flavor of my tea. And so I go everywhere with an open mug. And when I first moved to Edinburgh, I really feel like the first 2 weeks was fine. I would go on the bus, get on the bus, get off the bus. And after 2 weeks, it was like all the bus drivers had really had a conversation and decided I wasn't allowed on the bus with my open mug anymore.
No.
And so then after 2 weeks, they were all like, no, we can't come on the bus that way. And that's really also one of the reasons I walk everywhere, is because nobody will let me on the bus with my mug of tea, because I don't have a travel mug. But that's how I go everywhere. And when I first started working at the Botanics, that was one of the first comments that everybody made. You're just walking everywhere with your open mug, which I didn't think was that unusual. I was like, well, I made my tea and now I'm leaving my house. I'm just going to take it with me. But I think in the UK, maybe that's not propriety. I don't know. It's like it's not really good manners to walk around with your open mug.
Don't know why.
I've been told that a lot.
I think there's a big gap in the market there for some new invention.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just wondered, does meditation play a role in your life at all, or?
Yeah, I do. So when I moved here, I started going to the Buddhist society associated with the university. And so that's like Mondays and Thursdays I would go quite frequently. And yeah, that's just when I left Edinburgh for a brief time, so I stopped doing that as much. And I find, for some reason, I find meditation is better with community. Somehow. I'm not very good at practicing at home. And I think it's something that I would like to get better at. But when at least twice a week, I do try and go and meditate.
Nice. Yeah. And do you feel you ever use tea as a sort of meditation when you're having your tea by yourself, quieting your mind?
I guess I do. Yeah, I do really practice the quieting of my mind, but I don't think it's in like a formal meditative way,
Yeah.
perhaps. So I think of it as maybe two separate things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And is there such a thing as formal meditation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I often hear conversations about maybe there are two sides of this argument that some people um really consider like anything, not anything to be meditation, but like intentional clearing of the mind to be meditation. And then there are some schools of thought that like there's a very like single definition of what meditation is. And so I hesitate to use the term meditation loosely because I'm always very conscious of those people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's certainly something I'm really interested in sharing with people is how you can use tea as a sort of meditative practice where
Mm-hmm.
you're simply using that as an easier vehicle to come to a space where you can then just sit either by yourself or with others in community to just let your mind do its own thing. And it's not trying to do anything
Mm-hmm.
or following a particular set of rules. It's more just holding that space for your mind to just settle and do whatever it needs to do to sort itself out. I always think of it like a bit like a big filing cabinet, just giving your mind that little space to put everything back in order and sort itself out and discard what it doesn't need and put the important things to the front. And
Yeah, that's
yeah,
true. I don't know if you know the author Tamar Pierce.
heard of her.
Yeah, she's such an excellent author. 10 out of 10. Cannot recommend her enough. If you have any like children around age 12 in your life, perfect time to introduce these
Mhm.
books. And she's quite interesting because she talks a lot about, I mean, her first story is about a girl who like switches places with her twin brother to train to be a knight for 8 years. So she's disguised as her twin brother. And it's quite interesting because throughout the books, you know, you're dealing with knighthood and its fantasy and whatnot, but she really brings in meditation in lots of different ways.
Mhm.
And as a child, I never realized that what she was teaching me was meditation, but I was like, I'm going to do what Alana's doing, or, you know, I'm going to do what Dane is doing. And she's breathing like this and she's doing these practices.
Mm.
So I'm going to do it too. And I think, yeah, it's incredible that she really brought this into my life in such a manner that I didn't even know what she was doing, and I
Yeah,
just learned these practices from my favorite books, and that really impacted the rest of my life so much.
amazing. Oh, I'll need to introduce them to my children.
Yeah,
Who
how
are
old are your children again?
10 and 14.
Okay, perfect. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bang on. But yeah, I think there's definitely something around people sort of build meditation into this big, huge thing in their head that they always try and do, but they fail at. They can't possibly do it. Whereas I think, like everything, if we chunk it down and just make it as simple as possible, just when you're having your cup of tea, it could be as simple as just sitting for a minute, doing
Yeah.
nothing else. That could
Hmm.
be your meditation for the day. Just trying to make it as simple as possible. Start with a minute and go from there.
Yeah.
And not trying to do anything, just sitting, just being.
Yeah, I think that's the experience of like, I think it can be so overwhelming at the beginning, and you're like, I'm not getting it right. I'm not doing the right thing, you
Yeah.
know? And I think just the more you intentionally practice it, the easier it becomes. And yeah, I think maybe that's one of the reasons I like doing it in a group because there's someone maybe guiding you, or, you know, there are these discussions that happen after. But even, you know, doing karate for so long and really having this, you know, anytime we would enter and we would have this moment where we would do deep breathing and we would leave, you know, before we started any kata or anything, we would do deep breathing, and having someone guide that and kind of teach me how to leave everything helped. But I think it is the same practice as like when I have my tea, and I started noticing that when I was much older. And I think you're right, like just doing it for a minute at a time is the beginning. And then as you progress, you'll start to notice that it becomes easier and easier and easier.
Yeah. Yeah. definitely. So there's a challenge for
Yeah.
anyone that's listening or watching to this. So sadly, we've nearly run out of time, which is ridiculous. I could literally talk to you for hours and hours, and we've covered an a lot, going from your start in life as park ranger up to your life with tea and tasting tea and different plants and edible gardens. I wanted to find out more about edible gardens and landscapes and all the things we should be doing in our societies and cities and communities, right through to the work you're doing with conifers and conservation. And yeah, just what an incredible life. And I love that tea's played and is playing a central role in your day-to-day life and how you use that for your own sort of well-being as well. As we sort of draw this to a close for the moment, I just wonder, is there is there one question that maybe everyone's screaming at me to ask right now, or something you think we haven't covered that we maybe should cover? Anything that springs to mind, or have we?
Nothing comes to mind.
I think we've covered quite a lot of things. So.
Yeah.
And then finally, then I just wondered if you could choose a little tea routine or a little something that people can do in the 3 minutes that they're waiting for their tea to brew today, or however long, what one thing would you encourage people to try this week?
I think to me, tea at first and foremost is like a vector of connection. And so I think like the key thing to me is making tea for someone else and sharing a cup of tea. And I think I do this in like every work meeting I do. Obviously, every time I think I'm in the UK, people make tea for each other a lot when people come over. So I don't need to talk about that. But I make tea with my Gaiwan whenever I'm having a meeting. And so even though people come in expecting, we're going to get right into this meeting and we're going to be talking about these things, before I do anything, I always set out all my tea set and I make tea and I explain where the tea came from and maybe some of the tasting notes that they're going to expect. And I think people don't expect that. They're really taken aback, usually the first time. And by the second or third time, they're expecting it from me. They're like, okay, what tea are we going to have today? But I think it just creates a really nice space to connect with someone on a more personal level, rather than just work, 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 or meeting, meeting, meeting. And to kind of talk about tea and to have that connection as your tea is steeping and then as you're drinking the first few cups, before getting into anything. And I think maybe we need to make space for that a little bit more in our busy, busy lives.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think our meetings would be a lot more effective if we're settling ourselves and connecting in that way at the start of a meeting. So we're grounding ourselves and really focusing on what we're trying to achieve. And yeah, I think tea's got so many different uses, but yeah, a little gaiwan is just a simple 3-lidded Chinese teapot for those that aren't familiar. I can highly, like, I couldn't live without mine. I brew in mine almost all the time as well. And I quite often just wrap it in a little tea towel and chuck it in my bag so I can have it on the go as well. So, so versatile.
It is. It's incredible. And it's because it's so fast to make tea.
Yeah. You don't need
that way. You don't need to wait for your tea to steep.
And you can have multiple infusions, so you get much more out of it. But yes, even just using tea in that way, like if we are working in the office here, we quite often, if we're trying to come up with ideas, we'll break for tea and sit in a different space. So change the environment. We sit on the floor and we brew something that we're drawn to in a different way, and then we can come up and look at things from different angles.
That's true.
Yeah, it can lead to much more creativity as well.
Yeah, whenever I'm giving a talk or like teaching a course, even if it's not related to tea, or like even in university, whenever I was giving a talk about a topic I was researching, I would find a tea that related to that topic and almost like do the talk through the eyes of how this relates to tea, and then make a tea for my whole audience. So like my whole class would get tea every time I did a presentation. They'd be so excited. Or like, anytime I give a presentation, I try and have a tea that's associated with it. And I think it's like a different way of looking at things. So it's a bit more creative, but it also helps be more relatable.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing like a research topic and it's a bit hard to grasp. finding a way that it can relate to tea is like a new way of explaining things.
I love that. So yeah, tea,
Tea
100% the answer to everything and all of
always.
life's problems. So
Yeah. And
yes,
also, like, I'm so glad that tea brought us together because I'm
indeed.
really
Yeah.
glad that, we've connected, and I always enjoy talking to you. And I mean, obviously, we've just gone on, and yeah, I love chatting with you and meeting with you. And so
Yeah,
I'm
it's
glad I'm
really,
grateful to tea for that.
and thank you so much for coming on the Tea Mind. It's been fascinating chatting to you, and I'd love to get you back for round two at some point because
Okay.
I've still got so many more questions. And yeah, just really lovely to connect over tea. We've only met a couple of times before, but each time just having that little pause for tea together is really good, and it does cultivate a real sort of connection that you wouldn't otherwise get. And
Yeah.
just lovely to meet another fellow tea lover. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. And I hope everyone listening or watching found this interesting and maybe think of one thing that you can really take away. So whether it's to go and make tea for someone today or to connect with someone over a cup of tea, and try and focus on that for the next week and see if it makes a difference to your mental and physical health. So yeah, thank you so much, and I look forward to chatting again over tea soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I encourage you to consider one idea that you could take forward into your own life today. If you found this useful, please share so that we can bring more people along on this Tea Mind journey with us. And just a little disclaimer to note that the content shared on the Tea Mind podcast and web pages are for informational and inspirational purposes only and are not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. Always seek the advice of your doctor or qualified healthcare professional with any questions that you may have regarding your health or a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you've heard on this podcast. The hosts and contributors of the Tea Mind podcast disclaim any liability for decisions made based on the information provided. Always consult a professional for your individual needs.